straight away that the speaker has somebody else, so that while she did give me 15 minutes, I think the best favour I could do her is now to cut myself to 12 minutes. It's now almost 10 minutes past 6, so if I stop at 10 and 12, 6:22, and I promise I will. I've taught a class at 12 o'clock in St. Pat's for virtually 30 years, and the students would say, while it is, they said this, they didn't say they learned anything sometimes, but they said I was never late, so I never kept them on.
Well, you still have your 15 if you wanted though.
You've been too kind. I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 broad topics. The theme I'm going to talk about is really about, you can tell an awful lot from a society about the people they put in prison. One time you could say, and you still can say, about the United States system of justice, they can tell an awful lot by the people they execute. We don't execute people, but we put people in prison. The particular pattern and the profile of people you put in prison is very significant. I'm going to talk to you about adult literacy and modern conceptions of it. I'm going to talk then about the way we applied that in the context of the Prison Adult Literacy Survey, and talk about the results of that, what emerges from it, and then the implications of it. Now, if you look at the census form, it'll ask you, can you read and write? And that's the most old-fashioned definition of literacy that exists, but it doesn't tell you very much. Because as people would say one time, can you write your name? Then you're literate. But that really isn't appropriate in modern society. The thinking about in the OECD, and this is where the International Adult Literacy Survey came about in 1997, was that there are different ways, different levels of literacy, not illiteracy, because it's very hard to say what that means, but rather different levels. And at the time, there was a great deal of hullabaloo when we did the study with myself and Brendan Hickey and Tom Callaghan in 1997, which said that 25% of the population were at the lowest level, very similar to the UK. But they said, at the time, the view was, this is really 25% of the population have no literacy skills whatsoever. That isn't true. In fact, the lowest level question on that is one about aspirin, and it's the one that everybody knows about, which is, it gave you the standard instructions on an aspirin bottle and said, for how many days can you take this before you consult a doctor? But you needed to be able, it's challenging enough. Level 4, for example, is about 2 things to do in preparation for an interview. So these are really challenging. It's modern sort of ideas of literacy. There are 2 things that emerge from that I'm going to pick up on again that are of particular interest. And that's before we talk about the prison literacy survey. One of them is that literacy isn't just about literacy, but it's about a lot of other things. The one that surprised me is the factors that were particularly associated, the kind of constraints that low literacy skills had on people's lives. It might be surprising, it wouldn't surprise you too much to know that people who had low literacy levels, that there were certain things that they didn't read as much. Of course they didn't. But you're probably surprised to know that they had very less level of an involvement in sporting events, in community activities. In other words, literacy in our society means much more than literacy. And of course the other one, which is extremely important, is around participation in adult education. The people who participate in adult education already have high literacy levels. And that's one of the things that we have to address in society generally, is this thing that if you're good already in a skill, you tend to carry it on. If you're not, you don't. That's what we started with the Department of Justice with this one. Generally speaking, the general drift that has been found in other countries is that in people in prisons that they had generally lower levels. What we did in this study was to use the same domains as the International Adult Literacy Survey, namely prose, document, quantitative, and so on. What we thought was a good idea in this case was, following our preliminary survey, was not only to have levels 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as in the adult literacy survey, but actually to have a pre-level, a below level 1. That was the simplest thing we could possibly devise pictorially. Any literacy skills that we could pick up whatsoever, we picked up on that. We also asked the questionnaires on their experiences of school and above all their age of leaving school. Now, because this was administered by the prison education staff, we had a brilliant turnout. We had one group who were in Portlaoise at the time who decided not to participate, and that's fine because they would be a different group anyway. And otherwise we had a very high percentage, very high involvement. Great sort of thing if you're doing research, you can see why. Now, what emerged in this survey is that 22% were at pre-level 1. In other words, that no matter what simple test we gave, we couldn't pick up any literacy skills whatsoever. Level 1, 18%. Level 3, 14%, and level 4 or 5, 15%. Now what's interesting about that is that therefore the literacy level among people in prisons is substantially and very substantially lower than that in the general population. However, there are people in prison who have excellent literacy skills, level 4 and 5. The one that of course amazed me, you people probably know this more than anyone else. At that time, 2003, there were 3,400 on average in that year. I can remember the figure well, 3,450 people in prison. I couldn't believe how few women were in prison. You people know that. I think it has changed a little bit, but I couldn't believe how few women were in prison. At that time, it was 90 people out of that number. It's probably gone up since that, but at the same time, it's very embarrassing for somebody like myself who believes in gender equality to find that women have been a total failure in crime. It's terrible. That it's such an interesting finding still that you find that. However, the women who are in prison, and we took all of them at the time, very few gender differences. The most interesting one of all is around age differences. In the general population, what you find is among older age groups, lower literacy levels among older age groups, especially among people 50, 55 upwards, for the simple reason is they were less likely to have stayed on in school. The very opposite applies in prison. In the prison population, the people with the lowest literacy skills are people in their 18 to 22. In fact, age 32 and upwards, they were in prison were quite similar to the general population. Now, a lot of that has to do with complicated things to do with sentencing. A lot of it has to do with a number of things which I'll come on to next, like this one. Like we were able, because this was a study funded by the Department of Justice, to find out about the reason why people were in prison. Generally speaking, the people at the lowest levels were people who were in prison for violence and property offences. Drug offences and sexual offenders tended to have higher levels, but you want to be careful about this. If somebody, I didn't know this until I did this study, if somebody breaks into your house, they commit about 10 offences. And in the case of drug offences, generally speaking, you were talking here about people who are in prison for drug offences were people who are trading. So that's possibly the reason why it was that they were at the highest level. Sexual offenders tended to break into two groups. Some, because sexual offenders get longer sentences, therefore they make up a relatively bigger proportion of the prison population. They tended, some of them, to be at the higher levels, but not all. They tended to break into discrete groups. It wasn't always the case. They weren't all educated whatever it was. There were, professional people and so on. There were other people who were in prison. They broke into very different groups. What was the most interesting one for me was the question about, we did this on a trial, which was about how old were you when you left school, and what about that? The answer that came back very clearly was, I left school before I started. It wasn't really, I left school when I was 14, 15, whatever, but I left before I started. In other words, they left at 11, 12, 10, 9, 8 with poor attendance. And above all, the biggest thing was poor engagement with school. And an interesting one was, what did they dislike about school? Where did they have problems? So problems not just with reading, but particularly with maths. A lot of things that gave them the message, this school is not for you. It's not education. Failure in school has huge implications about a lot of things. But particularly, I think it has to do, educational failure has a lot to do with self-esteem, with a lot of things. It's not just one thing. If we could solve educational failure, what would we do? We'd make a fair impression on things. But a big thing is how it impacts on the choices, the way it reduces choice in various other things. I think that's the biggest one. I think a lot of the time we emphasize where people go wrong in school. I think the concept of engagement is a very important one. Why is it that people don't engage with school? What is it about school that they get very, very bored? The other thing I'd say is we have a national literacy strategy. But I think that it's a little bit more, it requires a little bit more than simply saying we need to spend more time with literacy. There's a lot of other things. There's an important social and emotional dimension in literacy. It's not just about learning and the skills of learning. It's not, above all, simply these people were not dyslexic. There were broad social problems that were in there, but some that it wouldn't have been too magical to work out on. And stop. Thanks very much.
He's a man true to his word, huh? Well done, thank you very much. And a lovely way for us to actually position where everybody else is going to be talking about. Okay, so now I'll open the next presenter's slides. And oops. Oh dear. Shower time. Would you get some tissue from the bathroom? It's got to do with having a 30-degree Indian summer atmosphere today. Okay, so warm welcome for Stephen O'Connor, please.
Mark brought home very many happy memories of the time that we carried out a survey in prisons. It nearly killed us all, I think, at the time. It was as much a feat of physical and psychological endurance as it was of academic endurance at the time, if you remember. It was a remarkable piece of work, and there are very, very few pieces of research that 8 years later still have the same relevance and the same impact in terms of the practice of literacy work certainly in our area within the prisons. I think it's true to say that what we have been trying to do ever since is implement the findings of that survey and the recommendations of it, and trying to find new ways of addressing the issue of literacy in our prisons. And what I want to talk to you about is basically the practical things that we are trying to do within the prison education units to try and address this issue, which is such a devastating part of people's lives, I think, as you said, and the emotional impact and the impact that it has on people's self-esteem is perhaps one of the saddest things that you can see in prisons, and there are very many sad things that you see in prisons. So I want to look at basically, just very, very quickly run through some of the points in relation to our strategy. I think the first thing we have to state is that we take a whole school student-centred approach in relation to the things that we do with students and the way that we interact with them in prison education units. And when I say whole school, really what that means is that every teacher is a literacy teacher. In each particular subject area, the teacher will be aware that there could be an issue of accessing the learning or of engaging with the learning for that student because of his literacy levels. And that student will be able to tell you that. So it has huge implications for the way that we approach, in a practical way, the issue of literacy work. And this can sometimes lead to a misunderstanding, because very often you will not see literacy appear on a timetable. You will see subjects like history, you will see subjects like Greek and Roman civilization, one of the best attended courses in an education unit I worked in, I don't know how many years ago. And the reason was because people wanted to know about these things. They wanted access to the, knowledge about democracy and the Greeks and the Romans. But they didn't have the means of having access, to those things. And the teacher was able, by the use of certain methodologies, able to make those things accessible to people. And that was one of the reasons why that particular subject was so popular among the students, because learning is always about, when there's a teacher and a learner involved, it's the quality of the human relationship that exists between the learner and the student that speaks volumes about how much much progress they will make. So it's very much student-centered in that way, and it has, as I said, implications for methodology. We use quite a lot of visual media, we use quite a lot of discussion, and we also integrate a lot of talking to students about their lives and about what's going on for them, and that's an integral part of the learning experience in a prison education unit. And people might see a teacher stopping and just talking to a student during a class about what's happening in their lives, and say, would you see this in another educational institution? I think not. Probably the department inspectors would have something to say about it if you did, but it's absolutely integral to what we do in prison education. The other thing that we do is we do a lot of planning within prison education in relation to literacy provision. Each education unit produces an annual literacy plan. It's one of the few areas that we dedicate our time to planning that as a specific subject. Things like, are we advertising our facilities in an appropriate way? Are we using appropriate learning strategies in our classrooms? Has the pattern of intake changed? All of those kind of issues we try to anticipate on an annual basis and draw up a plan for the following year. And also, teachers from the 7 prisons in Dublin do meet to share materials, ideas, and identify, continuing professional development needs. And that's very, very important. It's a mutual support system for the tutors, because working in the area of adult literacy, it can be a very lonely experience for people, and unless they have a network for people to share their experiences with, it can be, the quality of their work maybe, I'm not saying it suffers, but it becomes more difficult to achieve a high quality of work if you don't have that mutual support mechanism. We've been involved in developing assessment tools, and Robbie is going to talk to you about that very shortly. But just to say that the development of the assessment tool is very, very important, but it's important to understand what the purpose of it was. It wasn't just to produce statistics, that can be lined up and we can neatly analyse. That's not what an assessment tool, in our view, is about. It's about creating an aid to teachers in developing an appropriate learning strategy with the learner. Okay, it helps us to provide a context within which we can identify what is the appropriate strategy to use with a particular learner. Okay, whether it's one-to-one, whether it's in a group, whether it's going to be in, heading towards some form of formal certification. And it's been an invaluable aid in that respect, and Robbie will talk to you about that in some detail. We also have a strategy of integration of digital literacy, and that is so important, I think, these days. We can't just isolate, as Mark was saying, literacy as a specific thing. It has so many connections with other types of learning, and if you can't read and write, it's bad. It's bad enough, but if you can't read and write and you can't have access to modern technology, and you see the way we're struggling with it here today, you're cutting off a whole range of experiences to people unless you integrate that into their learning. And we try to integrate those who are learning to read and the work for those who are learning to read and write with those who want to access all of these wonderful technologies. In that respect, as far back as the 1990s, we produced an interactive literacy pack called It Could Be You, and coming more up to date, so there were many things developments have happened in between, but the interactive literacy package of 2011, which will soon be launched, and Julie O'Rourke will give you a very short demonstration of that, provide, I suppose, an example of the way in which we try to achieve this. Continuing professional development is absolutely vital, in my view, for tutors and teachers working in the literacy area. Unless you have that, it is impossible to keep up with the latest methodologies and the latest ideas. And in prison education, each teacher undertakes continuing professional development in relation to integrating literacy work into their subject area. By the end of the year, almost every single teacher in the Dublin City prisons will have undergone in-service in this respect. We also have, as part of a strategy of acquainting our students and giving them the opportunity to achieve formal certification and progression. Because very quickly, when people begin to get the hang of this literacy thing and get access to the skills, they want to move on from that very, very quickly. And many of our students want to start FETAC courses. They want to, some of them have ended up doing open university courses. And they may be the exception, but there's no reason why they have to be. And I think it's a question of will, and it's a question of determination on the part of the people who are charged with resourcing these areas, that that we can do this. And it may not be open university, but it is possible for people to make significant progress in relation to their literacy skills and general educational abilities if we put the resources in and we channel them in the correct way. So we always encourage our students to progress towards formal recognition where it's appropriate. Very many of them have wonderful learning experience. They're just not formal ones. They're not ones that they've been given a piece of paper for, but they, like us, want to achieve that very, very often, and we feel obliged to give them that opportunity. And we try to establish links with literacy schemes in the community. If people are going to leave prison, one of the big problems we have is that there's a huge turnover in the prison environment. So really whatever they start doing inside the prison is not the end. We do really believe in lifelong learning and the importance of people continuing their work outside. And we have our guidance counsellors will help guide them into various literacy schemes, and we have a post-release centre called Pathways in Granby Road, which will continue on with their work and supporting them on release. Okay. So I'll just introduce you to Robbie Robinson, who is one of our star teachers in the Wheatfield Education Unit, and Robbie's been involved with the rest of the literacy teachers in Dublin in developing the literacy assessment tool.
You're happy not to continue both?
Yeah.
Hello there. I'm going to just briefly go over a literacy assessment tool that we developed in the City of Dublin prisons, City of Dublin DUC prisons. I just have a confession to make here. I emailed a PowerPoint to Stephen, but I emailed the first draft of it. So Stephen was talking about in-service for teachers there, just there, and I think I need to go on one myself. I just, oh yeah, sorry, yeah. So
So if you want to, it might make life easier
Yeah.
just to get all of the ones from that
Yeah,
slide
yeah.
popped up there and then that was in.
yeah, it's just coming up differently than my own.
But you're at your grannies, we're all,
Yeah,
we're all in
all
form
right.
here anyway, right?
Yeah,
So you're
right.
fine. Yeah, great.
Right, so just basically, what I was going to talk about was the network. Stephen has referred to that anyway, the literacy network within the prisons and how that works. Development of the tool, the assessment tool itself is distributed nationally, the rationale and the process of the assessment that we go through, and so the benefits and outcomes of that. That's what I have proposed to do, so we'll see what I'm going to do. So Stephen has already explained how we meet once a term literacy teachers from different centres and as a group, you know, it might be 8, you know, depending on, and we developed this thing over a period of time. I think initially in Wheatfield Prison we started doing assessment ourselves. We set up something ourselves, and we started doing that in 2008. So actually 3 years ago. So we started assessing people there in 2008. So then we inputted into the assessment tool for the general prisons in Dublin. So this is the actual, coming to the actual tool here and what it works, how it works. I'll go through the whole process of how a student comes to being assessed. A student comes to the school somewhere or another, makes his way to the school and asks for a class. Sometimes it's an officer will say this guy wants help with reading and writing or whatever it is. But in general, students just come up, the lads just come up to the school, they get an interview. They're interviewed, you know, what is it you want to do? Some personal details, name, outside address and things like that, so certs can be sent on there. Age you left school, did you do this? So if anyone turns around in that thing, and on the back of this interview form we would have thing like, can you write your name, can you write your address? So the interviewer, the person who's interviewed in Wheatfield, there are a few people who did the interviews, there's 3 people mainly do the interviews. So they'll ask this question, and the person says yes, or he might just turn up and say, I want to help, I can't read. You get that most of the time, I'm straight out with it. So the person is then referred to me, I pick it up then, it's on the interview form, has been literacy student, it's ticked off, and I pick it up and I come make an arrangement to meet the individual and speak to him on a one-on-one basis about this, about how we're going to provide literacy classes for him, reading and writing, or other classes for him in the education unit. And we have I'll briefly go through what I did today with a couple of guys. I just, you know, explained what the thing was, what's going to happen, and what we hope to happen as a result of it. So that's the way I thought, you know, I just want to do this with you. It'll help you get with your classes. Grand, great, that's what I need. That's the normal response from everyone. So what I would do was I would go through this thing here and ask the questions about reading, about writing, and about numbers. Ask the guy, you know, can you read letters? In other words, someone sends you in a letter, dear John, how's it going? Can you read it? You know, and I note the response. I go through the whole lot, birthday cards, safety signs. Can you read safety signs? The guy this morning, one of the guys this morning, no, but I know what the pictures mean. So, you know, understand symbols. It's a literacy skill. So we make a note of this. Things like road signs, calendar, TV guide, important thing for, and teletext, very important things for prisoners. So we go through all those, you know, like, you might get guys saying, yeah, I read books now and again, you know, like, and all that type of thing. Or others will just say no to everything. So you know where you are at this stage. You have an idea where a guy is. Then ask about the writing. Can you write your name? Can you write your last address you were living at? Or something like that, you know, the address you lived at. And guys say yes or no, whatever it is, make a note of it. Do you want to know how to do it? I would ask the question, do you want to know it? And so it's given the guy saying, yes, I do want to know. The address, verbally, be able to say what was it, alphabet, that should be alphabet there, sorry. And writing a half sheet. A half sheet is a letter you write to the governor saying, on a sheet of paper saying, dear governor, I would like a special visit. Now, can you write that? Be asked that question. Guy will say, yes, I can. No, I can't. I get help off my mate. I get someone else to do this. Letters to family, letters to solicitor. So they're more, like different types of letters. We want to find out whether, could a guy take a telephone message and then ask him generally about the spelling. Let the man say how his spelling is. It's important for him to be able to say that. So, and we go through things like handwriting. How's your handwriting? Do you like it? Or whatever. Do you think it's good? Do you think it's, like whatever. Some people, a lot of guys say, oh, it's terrible. I want to be able to do attached. I want to do it good. I want to do it like you. I want to do it like that. So, go through the things. And then about numbers, counting money. Can you count money? The answer is always yes. Of course I can. That's why I'm here. The usual things. Check your change and things like that. And just I'd ask a little thing. You've got a tenner on you. You're buying a packet of cigarettes for $7.86. How much change do you get? Can you work that out? Or something like that. See if the guy can do it if he says yes. So, good thing. Understanding weights, things about grams and all that. As you can imagine, there's a lot of jokes about that go on, kilos and things like that. Measure. Understand the measuring tape, and what it means to use it, a skill. And then use a timetable, So, if you had to get to Galway for 5 o'clock, how would you know what bus to get? Ask the question that way. Basic adding, subtraction, multiply. I'm just asking here at these things, and things about the 24-hour clock as well. The last one there is, and then. So that's the guy's assessment of his reading and writing and number skills. Hopefully. So I'm going to go through some of the things that we do in the actual assessment. So this is the and I should have come back and referred again to Mark Morgan's thing. We just look at 4 pre-level, level 1, level 2 and level 3. So most of the guys we get would be within that category who are looking for help with reading and writing. We're not, fellas at level as 4 and 5, they're the OU guys. They're the, I don't know them. So we ask these things here, please read these letters, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and do you recognise these 4 words and what do these signs stand for? So there's a number of different literacies going on here. Now, why do we ask, never make the assumption that a guy recognises letters. That's the thing I learned in the prisons. That's why this is in here. I have met people who don't recognise letters. Not that they can't read, they don't know what that thing there is. So that's the area that you may be working in. So this is the pre-level. Hopefully I'm going to show the pre-level, level 1, level 2, level 3 reading exercise, the first page of it. There's no point in going through everything on this, Level 1 reading. Yeah, this is, so you see what it is there. Can you read the teletext, basically? And ask them to do a little bit on it. Bit inappropriate there, maybe, but it's all to do with the context. So this is, you ask what pages travel on and how do you do that? And you'd ask skills, how do you know there's a film on in the telly when you're reading it? Because there's a little thing, the newspapers, the Mirror, the Sun, the Star and all that are brilliant for that. They have little symbols all over the place. It's not word literacy, it's symbol literacy, whatever a term, whatever to use. They're in there, and they're brilliant for the guys. The guys know, there's a film on here, and also programs are always on at 7:30. Corrie's always on at 7:30, and it's people know these things, so they actually recognise them words. Level 2 reading, a small letter sent in, 10 High Street, Cork, 28th of January 2008. Hope you're well. Can you read this? So we know through this thing, a different type of reading here. The days of the week. There's another exercise in this as well where I have a different day. A different Tuesday is in it. So we just, our guys mixing these things up or whatever. Is it just? And also to go on from that, in part of the reading, we'd ask guys to maybe copy that as well. So see, can they follow the conventions of layout of letter, where they are, depending on what they've said earlier on. and then a level 3 reading. So this is a bit more complex. While you're doing the assessment, or having done the sort of initial page, the starting points, you'd have an idea where to go with a guy. You may only do the first one, and then no further. Just one page. The first thing of, do you recognise the letters? So if a guy doesn't recognise the letters, you don't go any further. You don't start saying, oh, can you read this on level 3 or whatever it is, or tell them it's level 3 or anything like that. You just stop and say, grand, we're okay, and we'll try something else, or look at something else, and chat about it, and then say, look, I think you can do this would be a good class for you, or whatever, and then, end the session, then end the assessment. So, assessment report, this is basically ticks off, this is for us, and for everyone, this could go to the teacher, the head teacher. So basically this will be the fella's name, his date of birth, Landon, the cell area where he is, and the date that this assessment was done. So tick off what he's completed. I would tick off anything there that he's completed, and then make comments about his reading, his writing, his numeracy, his spelling, his handwriting, and any other comments. And then a recommendation for the type of spelling or type of class. Now this will be adapted for the different centres. It might be a computer literacy class that you go into, as well as a one-on-one class. You might go into a group with a 6 or 8 or 10 in a group, sitting at a computer learning how to use it. So that's what will happen there. Then this is what we do, is a thing, this is called progress points. So this is filled in once a term. They're all, at the end of the year, Christmas, Easter, summer, fill in this with the teacher and the learner. So it just indicates progress that is happening with that learner. So you have 3 of these at the end of the year. This guy is moving on, and there's also, you've got a pile of work that the guy's done throughout the year. Filling in forms, writing his name, practicing his thing, and all that. So this will indicate. This is a quick way of indicating progress that's happening with the fella. So the rationale for doing it, there was more on this. There definitely was on the real one. So we've got information here about fellas. We've got the information about where fellas should be going in a class. We've got that rather than someone coming up. It's a structured way of allocating people. We've got the data about how many guys are at different levels, and just referring something back to when we first started doing it in Wheatfield in 2008, and then something came up, and the head teacher asked me, have you got any idea on what's things? And we had a bit of a record of everyone who'd been assessed and all that in our book, and we had a database and that. But it correlated with the findings of the levels, and the percentages correlated almost with the findings of the prison adult literacy survey. So just add that in there. So we know where we are with things, with people, and that. It helps us allocate. It helps us keep a track of everything that's been allocated with people. The idea of standardised throughout the prison. So a guy is, we don't want guys getting, they get fed up with, what's your name, what's your address, what's your date of birth, what's your prisoner number, and all this. This is a thing that's standardised. It's done for a guy somewhere. There could be if he moves up from Wheatfield over to Mountjoy or something like that. Well, we've got some way of stuff going across between the centres. We know progression. We can monitor progression better. Sorry, I'm mixed up there between standardised and inter-prison movement, if you understand what I mean. So I've gone through this. The interview is the process in Wheatfield. The guy is interviewed, he's assessed, he's allocated to the appropriate tuition, and then there's follow-up to see that that's happening. So benefits and outcomes. There's better planning for us. We know there's not things like, who's he, where's he going. There's no confusion about things. Things are working better. We can get things. We know what we need in certain areas for all types of resources. And the last one there would be more important, is continuity for guys. If there's some sort of movement, you know, a teacher's out sick or something like that, or something happens, or anything, or they move on to another prison, we've got continuity for their education, their basic skills education. So that's it from me. Thank you.